Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be giving people a few minutes to join, but while people are logging on, I want to go over just a few housekeeping details. All the registrants are on mute only. The only people who are able to talk are the panelists. And we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question anytime during the webinar, you can submit a question in the chat box, and then we'll take those questions at the end. If you don't see your chat box, you may have to click on the little orange arrow, which is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and then you just type in the questions, and we'll read them off at the end. Okay? So today's webinar is on intercity buses and state DOTs. And I have to admit this is something I've been very curious about because intercity buses used to be very popular for travel, and then they kind of faded out, and now I think they're becoming much more popular because they're equipped with Wi-Fi, they're very comfortable, a lot of people are using them for commuting or for business, you can get work done while you're on. But some states, it's like the Wild West out there and don't seem to have any rules, and other states seem to be sort of organizing how it works as part of the transportation system. So I'm very excited to hear from both of our panelists today and hear what they have to say. So our two panelists are Charlie Zelle, who is the Commissioner of the Minnesota DOT. He has been the commissioner since January of 2012. He came to MnDOT from Jefferson Bus Lines, an intercity bus company with routes in 13 heartland states from Minnesota to Texas, and he worked there for more than 20 years and served as president and CEO. And that's one of the reasons I was excited to have him on the panel today. In 2012, Zelle served as the governor's transportation finance served on the Governor's Transportation Finance Advisory Committee, which made recommendations on state transportation funding to the governor. And I know that he's in the middle of trying to decide, as commissioner now, what is going to happen with financing in Minnesota. I think they're still in that discussion, as many states are. And Charlie was born and raised in St. Paul, and he received a BA from Bates College and an MBA from the Yale School of Management. Our second panelist is going to be Kyle Emge, who is the Manager of Capital Programs and Operations at the Massachusetts DOT Rail and Transit Division. He's responsible for overseeing all federal and state programs, capital project implementation, and intercity and commuter bus service. So he's going to have a lot to say on what their program is doing. Prior to coming to MassDOT, Kyle served as a senior fiscal policy analyst at the Massachusetts Senate Committee on Ways and Means. So he'll have quite a perspective on the state finance and oversight and things. Kyle's master's thesis won an award, and it was from the Massachusetts, UMass Boston. His thesis was on the National Passenger Rail Policies and Effects on Investment, Ridership, and Congestion, which is, I think, an important topic in the Northeast Corridor. And Kyle and his family take public transportation every day and are proud to have lived a car-free lifestyle for more than 14 years. You don't have many DOT people who are car-free, but I think in Massachusetts it's a little more common because Boston's easy to get around. So before we go on to the panelists, I just want to say a little bit about SSTI. For those not familiar with us, we are a network of reform-minded state DOTs. We were founded in 2010 and housed at the University of Wisconsin. We work with state DOTs in three ways, or our work is in three ways. We are a community of practice where participating agencies can learn together and share experience as they implement innovative state transportation policies. We're also a source of direct technical assistance to agencies on transformative and replicable smart transportation reform efforts. And finally, we're a resource to the wider transportation community. And that's where this comes in. We also have a website, we have resources, and there's lots of interesting information on our website, ssti.us. So without further ado, I am going to turn over the presentation to Commissioner Charlie Zelle, and he's going to talk to us about what's going on in Minnesota. So Charlie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Robbie, and it's really an honor to be part of this webinar. I, of course, have spent most of my career in transportation, but in the private sector, being the president of a bus company, Jefferson Lines, and I spent a number of time on committees and maybe some national advisory groups promoting the idea that private sector intercity bus lines can connect well with public sector systems. And I had never imagined that I would actually be a commissioner now, speaking the other way, to say there are numbers of public and many modes that need to connect with private carriers, not just buses, but certainly trains, planes, and automobiles. So, and also to say it's a great honor to be a panelist with you, Kyle. I am deeply impressed that you are car-free, and because I actually have a second home in Massachusetts, I'm looking forward to learning how more I can do that myself. But getting to really the industry, and by the way, I'm probably the first state official in Minnesota that tried to convince a confirmation hearing that I had a conflict of interest. I actually, the Jefferson Bus Lines, in full disclosure, is still a family business of mine. Although I'm not part of the day-to-day operations, I do recuse myself from anything it has to do with the Department of Transportation here in Minnesota. But since I do know a lot about how it works here and in other states, it operates in about 13 states in the heartland, I'm very committed to the idea that there's great connectivity and great public purpose for this intercity bus system. And by what I mean with intercity bus, it's part of a larger connected system where not just Jefferson but many other bus operators can share schedules and passengers as with each other, but also again with some rural transit and urban transit and then other modes. And clearly I have a bias. I think it is a very efficient and, as our moderator pointed out, has been improving both its reach and, frankly, the comfort. They're made up of not just large carriers, but many, many small carriers that play a big role in many states' economies. In Minnesota, we've actually, after seeing many years of decline in intercity bus service, I'm pleased to say over the number of years, the past 10 in particular, there's just been annual increases in ridership and use. There's at least nearly 70 communities within Minnesota that have intercity bus connections, and as we know, in areas that have large student populations, this is becoming partly a generational trend, but I think people are finding both the benefits of not just being car-free, but the convenience, the cost-effectiveness of taking a Wi-Fi bus between college and home is just one of the growing segments that has been a great benefit. We think about the convenience. Of course, in the larger rural states, you don't have the every hour on the hour kind of service you might have in the area around Boston, and yet the technology and the ability to again to connect with other carriers has been a real benefit. More of this industry is not living in its own world, not its own bus depots, operating out of airports, operating out of multimodal transit stations is becoming much more the norm. I would say 20 years ago, when I approached transit centers as a head of a company and suggested we're actually in the same business of sharing passengers, it was a new concept, not really thought viable. and actually a private carrier can not only pay rent, but to actually offer commissions to a public transit agency, suddenly the idea of efficiency and actually providing revenue for a public system in alternative ways became kind of an opportunity that is now more fully embraced, I think, in a number of states. So MnDOT, I think I'm pleased to say, has been well before my engagement, has been a real leader in helping think about how we can become, as a state agency, a good partner with a lot of different bus operators. And again, it's about trying to develop a set of connections to put together a system as opposed to just point A to point B. As we know that most trips they're not really point A to point B. It's about making coming to a hub and then getting on another bus, or maybe it's even driving a car to a major park and ride and then finding a way to kind of follow the trip. With the idea of actual electronic ticketing and much more accessibility to schedules, even on your smartphone, the world of transportation has become a much more high-tech. We've, as a state agency, have looked at ways that we can make it more productive for all riders and citizens around the state. We've been encouraging a lot of our rural transit agencies to actually connect with each other and maybe have more regional coordination in different parts of the state of Minnesota. So the intercity bus carrier kind of threads that needle in many cases and makes connections not just within Minnesota, but to points in South and North Dakota and the far west, to the south through Iowa, Missouri, and then of course to Chicago and beyond. And the idea of actually having a network allows for, again, greater productivity and then plus access to destinations where anybody really needs to go. As I mentioned, part of the value of having a Minnesota-based bus company is we're able to kind of think about what are those big institutions and areas that the Intercity Bus Company can connect to. We have a wonderful new Union Depot, which is the home for Amtrak in St. Paul, but it's also a major endpoint for a new light rail system that just opened, the Green Line, last year. So the intercity bus carrier can connect with transit in the urban area and also start working collaboratively with, again, regional rural transit providers by doing joint marketing programs, by having joint schedules. Jefferson actually was a pioneer in putting actual interline connections on its own website with rural transit. So if you go on an electronic ticketing system, you're able to book a ticket, an electronic ticket, straight through to your destination. Part of that trip may actually be on a rural transit provider. So the rural transit provider actually gains an interline revenue and actual commissions when trips start in a small town and then connect to the larger system. I have to mention the pilot bike program. Minnesota has been very active in developing a statewide bicycle plan, and actually we're one of the 2 states developing a statewide pedestrian plan with the help of a Massachusetts consultant, I should point out. But I think that the idea of having choices in how people get around beyond a car is really key for both our demographics and for our the talent that we want to attract to live in Minnesota. We did have an update to our intercity bus study that was completed last year, and it really did take the existing network in the state and kind of review the status of where it is now, but also kind of make some recommendations about going forward. And of course, great recommendation is let's not lose what we have. But part of it is the challenge of marketing and communications. And we're a big state, limited funding. We want to make sure that we're targeted to ensure that citizens really know that they have options that relies on ways other than a car. And I think with, again, the internet age and social media, there's wonderful opportunities that we've been able to explore both at MnDOT and our subcontractors to provide greater awareness for those that are seeking alternatives. And of course, one of the findings is this is a very capital-intensive business. Transportation generally is capital-intensive, and funding for buses, for terminal spaces is always a great need. But by combining facilities, for instance, there's a new Duluth Transit Center that's under construction now. That will be a home with special bays for Intercity bus, in addition to Duluth Transit, in addition to feeders up to the northern part of the state. So we know that what funding and capital funding we have, if we leverage it wisely, we're able to make, again, those connections. So that's my quick overview. I should say that most of the funding that comes to our intercity bus industry here in Minnesota comes through federal.
Unmuted.
Comes with the Federal Transit Administration, 5311 F being the primary one, but we also try to leverage the other work we're doing with Greater Minnesota Transit to, again, make sure that 1 + 1 equals a much larger number than 2. And again, the private sector intercity bus becomes kind of a core strategy that is now widely embraced by rural and urban transit providers, because this is how we can connect the dots as opposed to just a competing system. So there's my quick story, and I'm looking forward to questions later.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. And I'm sure it's not a competition thing that you completely skipped over Wisconsin that lays between Minnesota and Chicago.
There's regular intercity bus service to Wisconsin and throughout Wisconsin, I'm delighted to say.
I just had to get that in there. Sorry.
I know. Madison is well served.
Yes, and I use the buses quite a bit.
Oh, good.
Yes, mostly to Milwaukee or Chicago. But okay, Kyle, we are going to switch over to you and see what Massachusetts has been doing. I think you have a pretty extensive program, so go ahead and click on the slide and you'll have control to change them.
All right, great.
Muted.
I'm really happy to be presenting along with Charlie on this webinar. So I'm just going to get into it and really describe. We're going to really focus on interstate coordination around New England and what we're doing with our program, but mainly I'll give you some background with how this all started as the Bus Plus program we have here in Massachusetts. There we go. So what it started with is we conducted we refer to as regional bus. New England's kind of unique in the way that we have intercity service and we have commuter service. And while they are separate, in many cases they overlap in some sense. Good example is we have service from Worcester into Boston that sells 10-ride, 20-ride discounted commuter tickets, and commuters take it on a daily basis, but it's also an intercity route that connects to Hartford and New York City. So we've kind of, I guess maybe just a faster way to say intercity and commuter bus, we've described as regional bus. So we conducted a regional bus study about 1.5 years ago now, and what we really did is we, identified some service gaps, economic and employment data, we looked at customer complaints, and, with what many people have done, the reduction in service over time. And so we took all this information and provided a baseline level of information, and the only thing we didn't do is say what we want to add or what we want to change. We just looked at everything else and had all the information to kind of inform us of our next steps. And to add on that, we've actually just kicked off the second part of this study. We hired a new consultant to do this, and this is going to really entail, it's going to build off the initial study to come up with a final list of service recommendations for service improvements, added services, altered services, new types of services, seasonal, anything you can think of. So we're working on that now, and that will be used to guide our investment, both capital and operating, in the future, and so we can look at a project-by-project or route-by-route basis on what we'd like to invest in. To continue from there, go over the program description. You see one of our new buses there in the interior. It's a public-private partnership. You know, as has been mentioned, the private bus industry, I guess in many senses, is kind of like the forgotten mode of transportation. But we in New England are unique in some way that we have quite a few private intercity commuter bus operators. And also unique, too, is you will have people that cross, due to the geographic nature of New England, you'll have people that go between 3 states on a daily basis for commuting. You'll have people commute from southern Maine through New Hampshire and into Massachusetts. So utilizing that already strong private intercity commuter bus network and focusing on a regional aspect of the program is really key to the New England region. And getting a few more details on this. What we did is we had this old state program. It's actually in state regulation called the Intercity Bus Capital Assistance Program. And that was somewhat loosely tied to an old subsidy program as well. And the Intercity Bus Capital Assistance Program, basically, we purchased buses for the private operators. They paid us a repayment amount on a quarterly basis, and they kept the bus for the life of the bus, and that was about it. Really, it was nothing beyond that. So we received a State of Good Repair grant, a bus facilities grant back in 2011 to replace these 28 buses, or actually 30 buses, sorry, 30 buses. And what we did is we ended up actually being able to get 31 buses. And what we did, instead of just providing them to the operators, we had them add new service in exchange to get those buses. The key here was the last time we replaced buses was 1998, and the industry is very different in 1998 and it's very different now than it was in 1998. So we set certain parameters based on risk on how many buses each operator would get. So if the operator is still running regular line run service, they're not just a charter operator, they'll get a replacement number of buses up to the number of buses they had in the old program. And then let's say you had 10 buses. If you were going to start a new route, that route that no one's running right now, that's worth 5 buses. If you were going to add a new route or a new round trip on an existing service, we already have 20 round trips a day, that's probably worth 1. So we create this risk analysis and this kind of different levels of replacement value, and then each operator had to stay within those parameters, but they were able to choose what service they wanted to add in order to get these buses. So we signed agreements with all of them, and the key is everyone had to add a new round trip. That was the basic minimum, and at no cost to us. So we've actually added 18 new round trips on a daily basis across the region, and we haven't paid any money in operating assistance for those services. The idea with that was we really wanted to try to grab the low-hanging fruit. Maybe there was a few routes where they weren't profitable enough or just barely, and maybe providing free capital assets would push it over the edge. So we've been pretty successful with that so far. Some of the operators who still weren't running service didn't get buses. We had 6 of those buses left over. We put that out to a competitive program, and people submitted applications, and we added 4 of the buses went to existing operators, and 2 of the buses went to a new operator in the program. So we now have 7 different private operators in our program, operating up 36 buses now. Again, it's really the whole thing in New England. We want to focus region-wide. We've done a lot of coordination with other state DOTs, and that's particularly key in this program. As I mentioned, so many things cross state boundaries in New England that it's really hard to maintain or just focus on service within your own state. The biggest problem we found with intercity bus service in our study we did was lack of service, which is kind of obvious, but also uncomfortable seating. So we actually brought a new seat into the market for the Buy America market. You'll see in this picture here. These are the first time they were put on intercity buses in the U.S. The feedback's been pretty positive so far. So another aspect of the component of the program is a customer service focus. What we did is we want to keep the brand identity of each private operator. So the bus is wrapped with each operator's logo. You have a little Bus Plus logo near the door, just so you know it's our bus. But when you walk in, the interior of the bus is standardized across all our buses. So no matter what bus you go on in Massachusetts, if it's a Bus Plus coach, this is the interior you'll see on the bus. So we want a really high interior with a customer service focus in mind. Generating revenue, part of that is, some of these routes we will be reporting as commuter bus service to NTD, generating additional 5307 revenue. We go to the next thing, major program goals, customer service improvements. It's all about providing a good, high-quality service for people who are commuting or taking intercity trips, and we really want everything to be customer-focused. Wi-Fi on the buses, we removed a row of seats, so we have 51 seats for extra legroom, and quite a few other elements on the bus. We implemented the identified service improvements. As I said, we have 18 new round trips on a daily basis. I think we added service to 7 towns and cities that previously did not have service. Goal is really to develop a seamless regional network across New England. Reinforce that connectivity, and I'll go into a little bit our smartphone ticketing app we're coming out with and the program website. Again, key aspects, working with the private operators. These are the operators in our program right now. We added Greyhound with the competitive process with those remaining 6 buses. We talk about marketing. So we provide the buses. The operators have to operate the buses at no cost to us and provide maintenance. But we paid for all the all the marketing costs to promote the new services. And I actually added it up last week, and over the past 14 months, we have spent $460,000 in marketing costs for all 7 of the operators to promote the new services they added. We worked with the MBTA's marketing office. They designed the ads for us, and then I went around and booked everything through radio spots, billboards, web ads, newspaper ads, you name it. The only thing we didn't do is TV, a little cost prohibitive there. Next thing, so again, we have 36 coaches in service now. We're about to add 10 more. Those just went into manufacturing last week. Really improved the fleet, trying to bring it up to a better state of good repair than it was. A lot of buses we have operating now are still from 1998 with 1.2 million miles on them. So new components to the program. So that was the original basis of the program, and the new things we're really focusing on are three aspects. The regional maps we have, smartphone ticketing, and operating subsidies. So you can see one of our maps right there. This is and I'll go into the details on this. This is a map of all privately run bus, rail, and ferry service across New England. So what we did with this, what we wanted to do is we wanted someone to be able to get around, whether it's commuter or intercity service, be able to get around easily and find where those services were available. And currently, there's nothing that shows you all this service. A lot of this stuff is not in Google for many different reasons, and you just really can't find this in a single location. And so a lot of people don't even know these services exist. I think that's one of the biggest shortcomings of the intercity bus network, at least, is we were doing advertising, and we've definitely increased ridership on some of the operators' routes because people just didn't know the services were there at all. And the marketing has definitely helped. So what we did with these maps is we wanted to get a central location where everyone can find everything. So we created 3 different types of versions of this. We have fold-out tourist maps. So you'll see the map on the previous page here. That is basically the front of the map of the fold-out tourist map. It's a map of all New England bus, rail, and ferry service. And in the back, you'll see an individual route listing of all rail and bus services. And you will see there's icons, you have addresses, you have icons that identify whether there is a local transit connection, a bike rack, bike share, paid parking, waiting area. You also see if there's a ferry, bus, or rail connection on the left-hand side of the route listing. And this actually consisted of me researching this over almost 2 years. There are 590 bus, rail, and ferry stops in all of New England. And so I have researched that and put all the information together and gathered stop information, address information, put it all together in a massive Excel sheet, and then worked with a cartographer at our Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization to put all this stuff together. So all these maps are hand-drawn, and we've just printed 600,000 copies of these and have distributed about 100,000 or a little less to each state in New England, and we sent some to New York State as well. So this is it took a long time to develop, but once we have it, now we just have to mark the changes and things that will be updated over time and hopefully implement those changes and maybe update this probably on a 2-year basis. We sent this out to all the private operators, get their feedback. We actually did not receive a lot of feedback. Not sure why. Some operators did provide feedback. but we've definitely did a lot of state-level coordination with all the other New England DOTs. So if you actually look at the map, you'll see every DOT in New England has a logo on the bottom saying we could put their logo on it, and they'd help distribute them for us. So we have the tourist maps, so basically a little fold-out pamphlet, trifold pamphlet. You'll go anywhere at a tourist center and find them. Station maps, the idea here is major terminals in New England, you'll go to the terminal and you'll see a New England map, and then you'll see a state map next to it. So we not only created a New England map, but we created a map for each state. And each state map might have a few more services on it that really, couldn't fit on the New England map, such as like commuter rail service in Boston or Connecticut. So if you go to a station, South Station in Boston, you'll see the New England map and a Massachusetts state map next to it, a little more detail. If you go to Connecticut, you'll see the same New England map, but then you'll see a Connecticut map as well. So we built those for them as well and provide all this at no cost to every other state. And we are working on a web-based and mobile app. These are not posted on our website now for accessibility reasons. However, we are working on a route-by-route level bit of information. As you see on the current screen, it'll be somewhat similar to this, and you'll be able to see, you'll basically be able to pick a city or town anywhere in New England and see all the bus, rail, and ferry services that operate out of that town and where they go. And hopefully that will be done by the end of the calendar year. Next thing we have is the smartphone ticketing app. So this will actually be the first multi-operator bus app that is completely paperless. So I know there are apps out there and operators are working on apps and everything. There's a lot of things in development right now, but this will have, I think we'll probably launch with 3 or 4 operators. And you'll be able to book tickets on them for commuter trips or intercity trips, and you can simply show your ticket on your phone to the operator, or they'll scan it with a driver app with a QR code, and that is expected to launch in mid-May now. We pushed it back a bit. It is a rather complex process to get the ball rolling on this, but what we did with this is we paid for all the development costs of this app, and there'll be a website with the same back office for each operator to handle. And then each operator pays, per ticket transaction for the life of the system. So it's really owned by the individual operators, and they maintain all the data and everything in the system. And we're really just bringing everyone together so you can book all these tickets in a single location. And we're really going to be the marketing element of that too. So, we don't access ticketing information, financials, or any of the trip data as well. The bus industry, I think Charlie will probably be able to tell you, the bus industry in many cases have not taken the lead. I think it's behind the curve on a lot of the technology advancements over time. You're starting to see that change now, and I think you'll definitely see that really take a leap in the next year or so. But we're really proud of this app, especially when it comes out, and our goal is to add more operators and get every operator in New England on here, and frankly, we could expand it beyond that. It's set up to be a nationwide app, and so it can be done anyway. Anyone from any location we can add them into the system. I think the biggest issue with this now is the ability of individual operators to accept tickets that are not printed on paper. And that's really a business management, issue that needs to be addressed on an operator by operator basis. So next page, this whole program aligns with our goals. Innovation, generate additional money, coordination among states, and standardization of information are key. One thing I don't have in here I mentioned is our operating subsidies. We've actually gone out and bid 4 new routes, 3 intercity routes and a commuter route, many of which haven't operated in 15, 20 years. Some of them are completely brand new. And we are providing 100% subsidy and capital in the form of buses for those routes. And the key with this is we are paying the whole cost of the service, so we are setting the ticket prices. So we really want to make sure people actually took these services. So we set the ticket prices at a discounted rate across the board, where you cannot buy multi-ride tickets, but rather all the tickets are cheap to begin with. I know one route is Boston, Mass to Rutland, Vermont, runs through New Hampshire, and the highest you'll pay for a ticket is $24 one way. So the rate we used is the discounted rate for commuter service in Massachusetts. The average is 13 cents per mile, and that's what we used as the pricing parameters for our tickets. So I think with that, yep, that is it for me.
Unmuted.
I'll hand it back over.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think you know, Massachusetts has a really exciting program. My colleague here and I were just sort of thinking, wow, this would be great, you know, if every state had a program where you were able to get all this information. I think it maybe is easier in smaller states and with the coordination of other states, but we're really looking forward to having more information around the country. As a tourist, I would love to be able to find that information if I'm not already familiar with it. So I think we do have a few questions, and I do want to remind people that if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we will be able to read them off. Everyone's muted at the moment. But if you don't see the chat box, if you're not sure how to ask a question, look for the little orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and that should open the chat box for GoToMeeting. So we do have a few questions coming in. One of them is, and I think this is probably for MassDOT, is the ticketing app open source?
So no. So what it is we've hired a contractor to develop the app for us. It's branded as a Bus Plus app, which is our program. But when you go on, you'll see all the individual services for each operator. So, you know, if you have multiple operators going between Boston and New York, and you click Boston and New York, you can see different trips from different operators. It is not open source. If someone wants to go in it, we can add them in it. It's really, you know, us coordinating with our vendor and with any operators that want to be added to the app. The key is we really want to keep it to a specific market segment in the sense that we want to make sure it's intercity or commuter bus service. We don't really want to bog it down with, we've had requests for it for local transit services or things like that, which really wouldn't fit in with it. So, yeah, no, I mean, we haven't come up with the whole plan for expansion beyond New England, but that's definitely something in our mindset, and it's being set up in that way.
Okay. And I think the same person asked if it was available to other jurisdictions. I guess probably, you know, I'm hoping that maybe other states might want to copy this, but I don't know if it's, you know, it was obviously tailored towards New England and your specific program.
Well, yeah, the key is it's everything is set up by individual operator. You know, we have open seating, we have reserved seating. We can pull from an existing ticketing system that a vendor has, or with many of the operators we're starting off with, you know, we are putting in their GTFS data and setting up their fare product for them. So it's individually managed, and it's expandable in any way that for intercity bus service for any operator.
Okay. Sounds like maybe if somebody's interested, they might be able to talk to you about maybe how to get that going. So we also do have a question from someone who I think is trying to set up a search app sort of similar to what you have for airline flights. And they said they have a challenge with smaller rural carriers that are business models largely commission-based, and the amount of work it takes to bring these carriers into the platform doesn't always justify the sales volume. Do either of you have suggestions to work with state governments to bring some of these routes onto the system? I guess so people can find the information.
Charlie, if he wants to take a...
Yeah, I was just here pondering that. I think one way to do it is to work through the intercity bus carrier in this kind of largely rural area like Minnesota or Iowa. But I think that is one of the conundrums, and I agree with Kyle when he just said that, you know, this industry is you know, has just too many pieces of paper flying around, and the idea to get ticketless and on the phone itself is something I think most people are beginning to expect. If you can use a phone to get a cup of coffee and go to the movies, why can't you get on a bus? But getting the actual technology to work when you have as much as 4,000 different destinations as part of the much broader network of bus destinations, it makes it harder. So when you kind of confine it to a particular regional area, like a network of rural transit providers, that's an interesting idea, and I think is something that should be developed. It's not there. I know that in Minnesota we're doing a pilot with Google Transit to try to connect different systems together. That's really the biggest piece, and I know one of my fantasies is that it crosses different modes, not just buses. How can you kind of find a search engine that will connect different trips together that aren't necessarily one ticket? And I think that still is a challenge.
I know from our end, many of our operators, we're essentially creating their ticketing system for them. They don't have a web-based ticketing. They definitely don't have smartphone ticketing, so we're essentially creating their ticketing portal. And so we've picked up the responsibility of maintaining their GTFS data, but you have to put some of the risk and some of the responsibility on each individual operator. So a lot of those rural people don't have the staff. I think the DOT can assist and maintain some data, schedule data and trip data and maybe pricing data, but something has to be set up and they have to maintain some level of that back office info and customer service aspect of it for each individual operator.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Wow, lots of questions coming in, and a lot of them are about the online aspects and having the information available on Google Transit, connecting to, whether there was a rationale for not having a local transit service. I think, Kyle, you just talked about how sometimes it's not always possible to have every service, but it seems there's quite a hunger for having a consistent place to look for both local and regional transit information. So there's quite a few people asking about that, and I think you've both talked about that. I don't know if there's anything anybody wants to add about.
Yeah, I can just add on. I think a long-term goal would be get as many things as you can, the local and inner-city connections on the same app. I think it depends where you're operating, what you're trying to do. I think a lot of it comes down to is that's great in I guess a concept, but if we had every single local transit service and all inner-city bus and commuter service operators on the same app, the level of data and the complexity to find that data, and then the types of tickets and different types of ticketing on the app can actually be so complex that it's not user-friendly. And so I think it's just each area who wants to do something like this really needs to think about it. I think for a trip planning aspect, Google Transit still is the best way to go for trip planning, but for ticket sales, you really need to think about your market segments and whether it's actually is just a lofty goal or something that really makes sense to put all services on the same app.
Okay. We have a question here about whether there have been any issues regarding the lack of guaranteed seating on small or regional small or rural providers. That seems to be an amenity for many travelers. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sort of assuming that everybody involved in the Bus Plus program, they know they're going to get a seat. Is that correct, or?
No, so it's actually set up in a two-tiered system. We have non-reserve. Everyone launching with us is non-reserve seating.
Okay.
Basically first come, first serve, and it says that on the ticket when you book it. So you can essentially take it on any trip. But that's the way their services are set up, and then each operator currently handles that on in their own manner. Many of them add extra buses, extra section onto each trip, so if the bus overfills, they have another bus run. In some cases, it just fills up, and then people know that, and they're going to have to wait for the next bus. But we're also having it so you can reserve seats as well. So it's an individual operator-by-operator basis, whatever they want to do.
So they don't have reserved seats, but they have a guaranteed seat.
They have in many cases, especially this is generally true of commuter services. Generally true is commuter services, you have a ticket, and you can get on the bus if there's a seat.
Okay.
And that's how it operates now, and that's how it'll continue to operate. And the commuter aspect is kind of what you need, but for intercity services, there will be reserved seating, and you will have a reserved place on the bus.
Okay. So you know you'll be able to, I mean, you won't be able to buy a ticket if there's no seats available.
For reserved seating, correct.
Yeah, okay. I'm sort of scrolling through some of these questions, trying to read them at the same time as I'm asking them. Let's see. Amtrak is partnering with Google to get their info into GTFS. Is that happening in Massachusetts?
So with the bus operators, yes, I've actually created all the GTFS data for the operators in our smartphone ticketing app, and we'll be putting those into Google very soon. I was actually just finishing up today. And so that'll be in Google. We put all our regional transit authorities, our local transit operators, those are all in Google as well. So you will be able to do many of the trip planning components of that. As far as Amtrak, that's on their own because it's their own service. So I assume all their services will be in Google. Mm-hmm. I think many of them are right now, at least in New England.
So are you working with? I mean, does Google, I assume, sort of scrapes the data off of your website so that they can provide this information? I think intercity buses are a little iffy sometimes on Google. I'm sorry, say that again.
I think Charlie might be able to answer. I think Jefferson was doing something with GTFS on their end, but I know on our end it was Google's only concern is ticket pricing, and the tickets are very different for intercity and commuter bus services and local transit. But with that, they still actually have no problem putting that on there. So you directly coordinate that with Google, and they pull it off a website where you host it.
Okay. So for either MassDOT or MnDOT, somebody is asking about the production of timetables, either paper or online, for all the intercity services operating in their state. They're asking, should this be the responsibility of a DOT, and any best practices or cautions? So I don't know, Kyle, if your website has got the actual timetables or not.
It doesn't. All we have for the operators in our ticketing app, we have the schedules. So yeah, in a sense, we have the timetables. Some of our operators change their schedules on an annual basis. It's not a big deal to have schedule data, but some of them change them every couple of months. We have a big operator here, Peter Pan, and they change schedule data constantly. There's no way we could manage that and keep that data online unless we're pulling GTFS data. So I would never put this responsibility on a DOT, except for maybe some small operators who don't change schedules often, unless you are going to set up a system where you can pull GTFS data that the operators are responsible for updating on their own.
Okay.
Yeah, and from Minnesota, I think that's exactly the same story. I mean, I don't think the DOT could stay nimble enough, and most of the operators maintain their own schedules. And, if you're right, some schedules don't change month by month, but others, there's a different connection times and different schedule times, and it really is about the carriers maintaining their own system.
Okay. I think we had another question sort of along that line of whether having the schedules online would be possible, and I think you've probably covered that.
The days when you had a big book and there was a schedule and to be that way for the year, I think we've, that kind of started in the stagecoach. I think we've moved well beyond that, and I haven't, other than certain city pairs, I haven't seen many printed schedules in this day and age.
Right. I know that with a large university here in Madison, we often have added service when there's classes letting out and vacation, and yes, football games and various things like that. So. And finally, I think we have just one final question. And again, I want to remind people we have a few more minutes if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box, and we'll be able to get to it. But we do have one final question that's up here on the screen right now. For both presenters, they're wondering what percentage of your costs are from ticketing and related overhead, including human resources and IT, and they're asking about a possible fare-free and no-fare approach from a cost-benefit analysis. I think that's probably more local transit, but if anybody wants to comment on the cost of providing these coordinating services.
You know, I don't have the cost of the coordinating services at my fingertips, and it really is something that you can spread over passengers or vehicle miles traveled. I know, in terms of kind of fare box recovery, which is really what it's described in transit, I can speak to the transit here in Minnesota that's roughly a 30% of the cost, fully allocated costs are from the fare box, but Intercity is really a much higher level of revenue than just transit. So, and of course, there's a combination of marketing and capital and operating assistance that helps stitch that system together. So it doesn't really quite compare.
Okay. So actually, we did have one more question come in, and I had sort of a question that maybe is related to this. Someone asked about traffic in Massachusetts and on-time performance, trends in punctuality. But I'm sort of along those lines, I was sort of wondering about whether intercity buses can use hot lanes or the high occupancy toll, the shoulder, any kind of programs to improve on-time performance and maybe make them more reliable and faster to be closer to a rail service, which of course does not have to compete with at least road traffic.
I could say, and again, Charlie can answer this. Minnesota, I know, has a great bus on shoulder program, and so us in Massachusetts, we don't have much HOT, HOV here, unfortunately. We have a zipper lane, reversible zipper lane on I-93 just south of Boston coming in, and it's only 7 miles long, but it saves a particular trip. It'll cut 12 to 15 minutes off your trip time just in the 7-mile segment. So it's huge for the buses. We have many bus operators coming up that corridor. We have very short distance HOV, HOT lanes. I think that's something, I personally, I can't speak from a higher level, but it's something personally I'd like to expand. But one interesting thing we have is I talked about Worcester to Boston. If you take the local commuter rail train, not an express one, but a local service, it takes an hour and a half. If you take the bus, even with traffic, it's an hour and 10. So in certain corridors, it does make sense. And we know a lot of people, the operators have scheduled their buses 5 to 10 minutes after the train departures. So if people miss the commuter rail, they have a commuter book with them already, and they just hop on the bus and take that in.
Okay.
Well, and I'd have to say I'm a big fan of that I-93 zipper lane, and I know it works well in Boston. And in Minnesota, we have min-pass lanes. These are actually kind of HOV lanes, but they're priced, variably priced, depending upon how much traffic for individual cars to actually pay a fee, and that actually provides for a much better flow using market forces of traffic that work well, and they're always available, for free for transit or for intercity buses. And we're developing, part of our vision to develop more of those min-pass lanes on all the major arteries throughout the metro. But as Kyle mentioned, we do have about 300 miles of bus-only shoulders. That's for transit specifically to kind of work through the system during peak periods of congestion. And that's just something that's been one of the innovations here. It is, I think there's some areas in Virginia that's looking at it, but it's catching on around the country. In fact, I think we have, somebody told me yesterday, our 300 miles is 3 times more than the rest of the country combined. So I think it's something that hasn't caught on, but I think it's been a great tool here. I know for the intercity buses, that was available, and I know in my case, thinking back at Jefferson, we were reluctant to actually train the drivers to use those bus shoulder lanes because this was a few years ago, they wouldn't be driving it regularly. It's a real safety issue to make sure you have operators of buses really kind of know what they're doing. There's not much clearance, and they have to work slowly. But that is something that I think is open for review, and it does help create an advantage for transit and bus riders.
Yep. Well, somebody weighed in and said that just an FYI that there's extensive and growing network of such lanes in the D.C.-Baltimore area, and all of these are regularly used by both commuter and intercity bus operators. So that's another example.
I'll just add in, I know we looked at bus on shoulder here. We started to look at it. One of our biggest issues is we hardly have anywhere where you can use this on a shoulder right now. They're just not wide enough.
Right.
And we have a lot of capacity constraints as far as the actual width of the right-of-way. So, so that's one of our big shortcomings right now.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think we are reaching the end of our time. I know that Commissioner Zelle has to jump off pretty promptly in a couple of minutes. But I did want to just thank everybody for tuning in. And well, I seem to have, there we go. I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in and to remind you that a recording of this webinar will be up on the SSTI website probably later on today, but definitely by tomorrow. And if you would like information on future webinars, or if you would like to get more information on SSTI, please visit our website, which is ssti.us. You can also follow us on Twitter, and we do have a newsletter which comes out about every 2 weeks, so you can sign up for that on our website. So thank you very much to the panelists. I think this was a wonderful discussion, and I certainly learned a lot about the future of intercity buses and the DOTs, and I'm hoping that this will stimulate further discussion among DOTs and customers and regional bus lines. So thank you very much to everybody.
Right. Thank you. I learned a lot. Thanks.